everyone, and welcome to Ponytail Talk, global advice from a female CEO pioneer. I am Kimberly Lewis, and I have 25 years international executive experience, and I continue to hold an international general manager's position and a board position. But I'm also now a leadership trainer, coach, and motivational speaker. You can contact me on my website, www.globalbusinesstherapy.com. This podcast is brought to you by Global Business Therapy and produced by Raskin Resources and the great Patricia Raskin in the lovely state of Rhode Island. Now, this is our third podcast, and in our first podcast, we talked about breaking the glass ceiling. In our second podcast, we talked about some of the things you need to do to prevent your ceiling from shattering. Today, we want to talk about what you need to do when you encounter stone throwers and curveballs on your journey up the career ladder. In other words, how do you overcome the obstacles that you may face on the way? Now, if you're just tuning in to us for the first time, you may be wondering where the name Ponytail Talk came from. So I'm going to keep you a little bit in suspense and urge you to listen to episode 1 or episode 2 of these series where I explain where it came from. But what I will tell you, I do use the name from my book, Ponytale Talk. It's all about you, winning career strategies for women. So what's this about stone throwers and curveballs? It's about some of the obstacles you will face on your career journey. Now, these obstacles can come in all shapes, sizes, forms, and come in all kinds of situations, in situations where you really don't expect them to happen. A situation for me was at a company outing. Now, what could happen at a company outing? So let me tell you about one of my curveballs. Let me set the scene for you. 10 executives, 10 dog sleds. Each dog sled has 5 dogs. Picturesque Mount Blanc in France in the background, and about 1 meter of icy snow on the ground. Now, from the 10 executives, 9 were men, of course, and me. Now, I knew I was going on this excursion, so I read a little about dog sleds. And what I learned was the number of dogs you should have on your sled is directly related to the weight. And my 9 colleagues were kind of big guys, and each one had 5 dogs on their sled. So I said to the organizer, maybe 5 dogs is just a little bit too much for my size? And the guys immediately started poo-pooing me and told me it was all right and I would hold up the entire group if they had to change sleds. Now, see, the French had assumed that Kimberly Lewis was a man. God forbid there was a woman among this executive group. Now, the organizers discussed in French, which I understood, if they should change the 5 dogs to 3. And my colleagues impatiently waited to start the outing and just watched. So I felt embarrassed. I felt pressured. And at the end, not to hold up the group, I said, fine, I will stay with the 5 dogs. So we all got on the sleds and we started going around the course. I was not 15 minutes into the ride when my dogs went faster and faster. Even with the commands to go slower, they were just going way too fast. I had my full weight on the brake, and it was not even slowing them down a bit. I no longer had control. Nothing. I had no effect on the dogs. And as we turned the first curve, I literally flew off the sled into the air and landed on my shoulder and broke my shoulder and collarbone. Now, let me tell you, it hurt. This might be one situation where you can cry. I didn't cry till I got to the hospital, but I should have, okay? They had to send the rescue dog sleds to pick me up and bring me to the main station. And with each bump on the ice on the way back, it sent a penetrating pain up my arm. Now, once transported and in the hospital, they gave me some really hardcore painkillers. And that's when I called my husband to tell him what happened. Now, I was so incoherent when I called him. He had thought that I went out and got drunk with the boys. Now, after that incident, I lost 1 week of work. They operated on me, put plates in my shoulder and my collarbone. It cost me a lot of energy and a lot of time. Anyway, what did I learn from this little episode? I learned that peer pressure exists even at the executive level. And when you are the only woman in a group of guys, you can be edged on. And you sometimes do it because you want to prove yourself tough. But you know what? You don't have to, especially when it comes to bonding activities. And the dog sled was not the first bonding activity I took place in. I've taken place in paintball and some other ones. But when it comes to these kind of activities, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. You can just learn to say no or insist on having things done your way. In this situation, I should have insisted on 3 dogs. Who cares what the others think? It does not matter because it will be forgotten when you get back to the office anyways. And when the guys begin to swap their own war stories, which guys do, then they're going to completely forget about you. But on the other hand, networking is a critical, very, very critical as you climb the corporate ladder. But it should not put you at risk, either physically or mentally. So just learn to say no or make your own rules. And remember, you're going to encounter stone throwers and curveballs in all kinds of situations and with all kinds of people. And they may not always be with your colleagues. They may also be with your subordinates. As a rule, every executive must take time to understand their business, their subordinates, and the people behind the business. This means understanding how much each position contributes to the company, what position contributes to the company, and understanding how they contribute to the results of the business. This also means if you want to be a good executive, you have to spend time on the factory floor, in product fulfillment, with customers and presentations, or with sales in the field. Now, we women tend to do this really, really well because we integrate really well. We tend to be less threatening, but we often face challenges and obstacles that men do not face because the masses are very often skeptical about women in the field or on the factory floor, and sometimes they just don't want you around. Very often, people also think they can get away with things when you're a woman, especially if they really do not want the boss looking over their shoulder. And this was another situation I encountered. As vice president of sales, I once decided to choose 5 sales representatives to spend the day with. Now, some of them were perfectly fine with this decision, but others did not envy the prospect of spending the day with the boss. And one sales representative decided to take the situation into his own hands. He was going to make sure this did not happen. So I showed up to ride with the sales representatives in the morning. We went to the first customer, and after the visit, I was not feeling so well. By the time we got to the second customer, I was sneezing, my eyes were red, and I could not breathe, and he had to bring me back to the office. Now, back at the office, I began to hear rumors that this sales representative was bragging that he managed to get rid of the boss. I also heard rumors that he purposely left his horse gear in his car when I went riding with him so I would have an allergic reaction. Now, he knew very well I was highly allergic to horses, and he did this so I would not make it through the entire day with him. And you know what? I really doubt he would have tried this if I was a guy. Now, he claimed that he did not know about my allergy, which was completely BS because 2 months earlier I had opted out of a sales event at a polo field because of the allergy. So everybody knew about it. And he claimed he did not. But you know what? I couldn't prove that he knew about it, but I called him on it. I faced him straight on and I told him I knew what he did and I was going to be watching his back every move he made for the next 2 months. So in the end, he actually paid for it indirectly. And the result was that word got around not to mess with me. So my point for you is that if somebody messes with you, call them on it. Do not ignore it. If you let people get away with stuff, even the little stuff, you will get a reputation as a pushover. And then, do you know what happens? The little stuff becomes big stuff, and someday the big stuff could ruin your career. But these two examples are not the only kind of curveballs you may have to dodge. Sometimes the curveballs are in the form of blanket tests of flexibility. Sometimes companies or narcissistic bosses just want to test you and see how far you will go for them or their company. Now, these kinds of tests are not always gender specific. It happens in both genders. It happens to guys and gals, okay? And it happens to both genders as people work their way up the career ladder. Now, take, for example, have you ever worked or known somebody who's worked for one of the large consulting companies? I won't name them, but I think you know who they are. Well, just look at what they put their junior people through. I have seen junior consultants so exhausted from work hours they need to put in to prove themselves, it's almost criminal. And many of us have been there and done that, and we believe once you have proved yourself, life should get better, right? Well, sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes tests of loyalty and flexibility will follow you all the way through your career journey. And this happens a lot, but it happens especially to women. I've been the victim of loyalty tests and flexibility tests many times. One time, I was even on a board that consisted of 15 CEOs, and I was the only female. Now, each Monday morning, we would have a telephone conference, and everybody was supposed to call in. But each week, at least 2 or 3 CEOs were not there. They weren't present due to vacations or telephone inaccessibility. And during peak vacation times, up to half of the CEOs were not present due to family obligations. So when it was my time for my vacation, the coordinator of these conference calls, which was the assistant to the board of directors, called me, hunted me down, and insisted that I had to join the call even though I was on vacation. I asked why, because other people didn't join the calls. Other people were missing it. And I was told that the upcoming week's meeting would be very special. Critical decisions would be on the agenda, and I had to be there. But you know what? My vacation was a safari, and I was going on safari, and there was no way to call in, even if I wanted to. If I wanted to, I'd have to leave the safari, and I told them I would not do it. And you know what? Life went on as usual the following week. Nobody said anything, but I did make a point of telling them that I would make myself responsible to get the information I missed. Now, you know what? On that call, another 5 people also didn't call in. And when I tried to get the information that I missed, there was nothing critical. This was just a bunch of nonsense and a test of flexibility and loyalty. Now, sometimes you can get away with this stuff, and I got away with it, but getting away with it really depends on how valuable you are to the organization. So I wouldn't necessarily advise you to do exactly what I did. What I would advise you to do when faced with such a situation is to try to understand the goal of the request and solve the situation in another way. In demanding jobs, you need to be flexible, and flexibility is an attribute you will need if you want to move up the career ladder. But there are legitimate requests, and there are requests that are artificially constructed to test your flexibility or loyalty. Always ask yourself, what is the goal? What does the company or your boss really want? How can I give them what they want, but do it in my own way? It is your responsibility to deliver, but you do not have to jump through artificial hoops to do so. When I tell some of my stories about avoiding throwing stones and dodging curveballs, a lot of women say to me, oh gosh, something similar happened to me. A lot of women also say, does this mean, or they ask me, does this mean we women have to work harder than men do? Well, in general, I think everybody who wants to climb the career ladder has to work hard. But I also think that we women very often need to dodge just a few more curveballs and avoid a few more thrown stones than the average male. Trying to break the glass ceiling can be exhausting. And there are times you might feel like you are running just to keep yourself in the same place. You may witness male colleagues running at a slower pace, but gaining more ground. But this is the reality of the business world. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of concrete statistics that prove that women must work harder than men or that prove we are faced with more obstacles, although sometimes it really seems that way. Now, discrimination laws have placed some protection against being ruled out of positions of gender, but they do not govern the extra measures you must take to be considered for a position. The majority of thrown stones or curveballs you have to dodge are external in nature, so be realistic and know you're going to face them. Call people on them or call companies on them, and try to learn to say no or do things by your own standards. Now, I told you a couple stories in this podcast, but the truth is I have dozens of them. If you like our series, please give me a like on whatever channel you are listening to. If we get enough likes, I'll continue with more lessons and more stories. And believe me, I have 25 years of them, and some as recent as this year. You may think that someday the challenges will stop, but they never really do. But the good news is even if the challenges don't stop, neither do the opportunities. There is plenty of opportunity out there. So stay positive, stay focused, and you know what? Let's change the statistics of female CEOs together. Once again, I am Kimberly Lewis, CEO, author of Ponytale Talk. It's all about you, winning career strategies for women. Please listen to my leadership show on Voice America Business Station, Leadership Beyond Borders. I am available for motivational speaking in both the United States and Europe. And look at my website. Contact me at globalbusinesstherapy.com. I would really like to hear from you. Tell me what you want to hear about. We're going to probably continue this podcast, but we want to hear what you want to hear about. I have a lot of stories. I have a lot of advice and a lot of lessons, but write to me and give me your comments. So thank you for listening. And if you're tuning on to this podcast number 3 as your first podcast, please go back and listen to podcast 2 and 1. And remember, please visit my website at www.globalbusinesstherapy.com.